Welcome to the Mindful Living Podcast. My name is Robilio, and I'm your host. I'm also a licensed clinical social worker, personal development author, public speaker, and wellness expert. My intention is to provide education and knowledge that will help you gain new insight and support your journey of healing, recovery, and wellness. If you're wondering how to break old patterns and create a life of wellness in mind, body, and spirit, stay connected. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Mindful Living Podcast. Can you believe we are only days away from April? Seriously insane how quick time is passing by. I hope this year has been going well for you all. I know for me it has been great, but if I'm being honest, sometimes it feels like I'm experiencing multiple months in just days at a time. I'm so busy that it's almost kind of silly to even think about. But anyways, that's besides the point. Because if you guys know me, you know that I often talk about how we only have now. So in other words, it really doesn't matter what has happened up until this point. So for now, I am choosing to be here with you all. And I feel so blessed to be connected back here, having the time and space to take the time to share what has been on my mind and heart lately as something that I want to share with you all. And so if you're new to this podcast, welcome. I'm glad you're here. And if you've been connected with me for some time, then you know I am all about helping individuals identify their underlying core issues and trauma responses as a crucial step to the healing and recovery process. So in other words, for me, it's all about we have to go find that trauma or multiple traumas and offer love and healing there, because I strongly believe when we heal our trauma, naturally we begin to heal our mental health. We begin to heal our addictions. We begin to improve our mood, our behaviors change, our perception shifts. So everything that often we think is the problem actually is not the problem. It's usually, if not always, a symptom of something deeper. And so for today, we're going to talk about trauma responses. And so I thought this would be helpful just because a lot of times I'm talking about what trauma is, and it's not often that we really get to dive into the responses that are a result of trauma. So there's tons and tons and tons of information that we can unpack around this topic. But for the purpose of today, we're going to cover just some basic, simple things that I think could really be helpful no matter where you are in your journey. So one, we'll touch on what's the definition of a trauma response, and then what are the actual trauma responses. So a trauma response, it's been defined in many, many ways, but to keep it simple, this is something that's learned and typically becomes a way to cope in the real or perceived presence of a traumatic event. So in other words, people fall into their learned trauma response when trauma is actually happening and even when it's not actually happening, but they perceive it to be. So this is like seeing threat where there actually is no threat, and then automatically falling into the response as if that threat is happening. So you might be wondering, what are the actual trauma responses? So there's 4 trauma responses, and I'm just going to name what they are and give you guys a few examples of each. And as always, if there's specific things that you guys want to learn more of, or if you have additional questions, never hesitate to reach out to me. You can connect with me on Instagram at mindfulliving.now, shoot me a message, or email stephanie@themindfulliving.com. All my contact information is in the show notes. But all right, so the 4 trauma responses, we have flight. So examples of this would be somebody who's considered the workaholic, also the overthinker. This could also be a person who struggles with anxiety, panic, or OCD. Oftentimes, a person who's stuck in a flight trauma response, they tend to have a hard time sitting still, and also perfectionist. I'm laughing because that's me. I'm recovering. I'll get to that, but basically from all of these. Then freeze is the person who has a hard time making decisions. You often feel stuck in your life. Perhaps you find that you feel safer isolating, or you tend to isolate and maybe even have a hard time being present because you're often dissociating. So that would be somebody who's in a freeze trauma response. And then there's Fawn, the Fawn response. This is the people pleaser. These people often lack an identity of their own. They struggle to have boundaries. Oftentimes, if asked, what are your boundaries, they're not even able to identify or verbalize what they are, just because they're so disconnected from their authentic self. These people often are told they're codependent or struggle with codependent traits, and then they often feel overwhelmed. And right now, if you're listening thinking, oh my goodness, she's describing me, don't worry, this is very normal. And then last but not least, there's the fight trauma response. So oftentimes a person who's in this response, they tend to have anger outbursts. Oftentimes they might be referred to as quote unquote the bully, maybe even the narcissist, or been told that they have narcissistic traits. They try to control others and can even have explosive behavior, unpredictable behavior. And I want to highlight that it's completely normal if you are feeling like you are a little bit of all of these, because the truth is most of us are recovering from definitely all of these responses. There's not one person, at least that I've ever met, who hasn't experienced trauma in their life and as a result learned certain responses from that trauma or from those traumas, right? Because it is true that people have more than just one traumatic event throughout their life. So I know for me, being on the path of recovering from trauma, there was a time in my life that I was absolutely being held back because I was stuck in all three, flight, freeze, and fawn. I saw a little bit of the fight response in my life. Believe it or not, there's a time that I went through having anger outbursts and experiencing rage and things like that. But the deeper I looked within, I was able to uncover that was really deep sadness, right? Which for most of us, that's typically what anger is masking, is this deep pain, this suffering, this sadness. So, regardless of which ones you identify with, the thing that I love most about learning information like this is once you become aware, it gives you new information about yourself. And I often say, once you know, and you can never unknow something. And so one thing that I really love about self-awareness is that once you're in a practice of maintaining self-awareness, so daily self-awareness, it allows us to notice when we are in a trauma response. And then when you notice you're falling into a trauma response, that's an opportunity to choose different or better, as opposed to, let's say, being the person who is unaware or who does not know what their trauma response is, and then falling into a trauma response and then perhaps getting upset with yourself. Let's use the example of a people pleaser. I often refer to this because that was one of my many core issues, was my difficulty in honoring my true self, all because I was, fearful of letting other people down. But think about this for a moment. If a person struggles with people pleasing and doesn't understand why they struggle with people pleasing, or doesn't understand what happened in their life that led them to learn the response of people pleasing, isn't it likely that every time that person goes and people pleases, they're going to end up feeling guilt and shame, right? Probably they might even beat themselves up, like with thoughts of, oh, there I go again, or I'm not good enough, or I'm inadequate. Like all these different negative thoughts can run through a person's head simply because of a lack of understanding of self, right? It literally is a game changer when you learn about yourself and you begin to get curious about your thoughts, your beliefs, your perceptions, your behaviors, your mood, like what's underneath it all, right? As opposed to just seeing it for what it is, but peeling back those layers and getting curious about, what happened to me that led me to become the people pleaser? What happened in my life that led me to become the perfectionist? What happened in my life to where now I fear letting go and all I do is try to control people, places, and things. What happened in my life that I'm in a constant state of panic or that I'm full of anxiety, right? What happened to where, one thing happens and I explode or I have an anger outburst? These things, sure, we've chalked them up to be normal because let's be real with each other. We're living in a world where a lot of people are stuck in trauma. We see it every single day in personal relationships. We see it in the workplace, and we see it sounds funny, but even in traffic, right? The guy who's laying on the horn or the lady who's giving you the bird for no reason. So we see trauma every single day. Anytime you see somebody who is presenting upset, angry, disruptive, or disgruntled, just assume trauma's in the room, right? Because who we really are at our core, our authentic self, I promise you that's not who we are. We're not angry people. We're not sad people. We're not negative people. That's actually what I believe is a complete opposite of the truth of who we are. I believe at the core, we are of the utmost value. We are worthy people. We are of love, of joy, of pure passion, of desire, understanding, acceptance, all these really beautiful emotions. But because we have experienced trauma, it's really easy to fall out of alignment with our truth. And one thing that's also important to note is whether you're the person stuck in flight, freeze, fawn, fight, or all of them, at one point in your life, these responses are what kept you safe. These responses are what kept you safe. That's so important to know because we have shame and guilt attached to the things that we are, right? And once you realize that these responses is what protected you, there's something freeing about that. It invites forgiveness. It kind of creates that space to just forgive yourself and to hold the space to know that all along you've been doing the best you can with what you have, where you are. And if you're my client listening to this podcast, then you've definitely heard me talk about this, but I'm going to say it because it's so important. The truth is, for every single one of us, myself included, if there was ever a time in our life where we could have done better, then we would have done better. If we could have ever done better, we would have done better. But the truth is, we are always operating from our level of awareness. So it's not until you know better that you can choose better. And that's why I'm for those who are listening, I'm so proud of you for choosing this moment to show up for yourself, because once you make the commitment to be on the path of healing and recovery, it's just that. This is a path. It's a personal path. It's a powerful one. And we don't ever really get there, right? It's this constant unfolding. But having awareness is absolutely the first step. So another example is, let's say if I'm the person struggling to say no, because again, I'm recovering from people pleasing, AKA the fawn response, and I'm aware that my difficulty in saying no is coming from my past self, then me as an adult who now has the skills to function and operate from my healing self knows how to set the boundary of no. But if I fall into my old self or my past hurt self, it could be hard to say no. Do you see the difference? So again, like I said earlier, if I was the person who didn't have awareness, I could struggle with saying no and have no idea where that's coming from. But now, because I'm on the path of healing and I'm operating from my healing self, anytime there's a situation in my life where I find it difficult to say no, I'm able to say, wait a second, hang on, Steph, this is actually your old self showing up. Take a moment to breathe, take a moment to be, and then choose, right? Then apply the no boundary. So there's a big difference between operating from the old hurt self versus the new healing self. So something that I invite you guys to do is take some time, not right now, maybe after or when you have the space for yourself, but take some time to think about a recent incident in your life where you fell into a trauma response. Then once you identify that incident, I want you to go on to identify what part of the response did you fall into. So if, let's say you identified that you fell into a fight response, okay, was it you struggled with an anger outburst? Or let's say you identified that you're struggling with setting boundaries or being the perfectionist. Identify what it is What was the response? So flight, freeze, fawn, or fight. And then what part of that response? So get clear on those two things. And then once you name it and acknowledge it, then lean into the space of how you could handle that same or similar incident moving forward. So in other words, okay, you've identified how you were operating from the hurt self. Now, what can you do differently so the next time something happens, you can operate more from the healing self? It actually serves no purpose for you to, play the tape and, I could have done this, or I could have done that, or I wish and shoulda, coulda, woulda. Like, you can't undo what you've done, right? And remember what I said a moment ago. If you could have handled that situation differently or better, then you would have handled it differently or better. But now, because you're learning this new information about yourself, what can you do differently if a similar or same situation happens moving forward? So I'll share these questions in the show notes. And when you have the time and space, I really, really, really encourage you to sit down and do a little journal moment on this, because it's you'll be surprised what comes up, and it's actually can be not only insightful, but very helpful moving forward. It's also important to know that these parts of us never fully go away. But the more aware you are, then the easier it becomes to identify when you're operating from your hurt self versus your healing self. And I'm laughing, I say healing self, because the truth is we are never fully healed. I've said this before, but it's actually quite funny. I used to laugh at the quote, it's all about the journey, not the destination. I kind of thought that was cheesy. But now that I'm on this path for almost a decade, I wholeheartedly know what that quote means. We don't ever get there, guys. We don't ever get there. And so there's something to be said about just trusting the unfolding of events happening in your life, honoring where you are. I think this is a big one. So often we want to be further along, but think about it. Even if you had some magic power to get further along, when you get further along, that's not going to be enough either, right? We want to get further along and further along and further along. And so honoring where you are and learning, right? Developing that skill of how to just be where you are. Like, that's huge. Like, how to be where you are. Most people are not at all present. So learning how to be where you are, and then trust the journey, right? Trust the journey. Again, it's a process, and it's a personal process, and it's a powerful process, and it's really up to you. How your process will go, right? We can't always control what happens along the way, but we certainly have the ability to choose how we respond to the outside disruptions or the outside noise or the obstacles that get thrown in the process that we weren't expecting. So there's absolutely so much more that I could chat with you all on this topic, but this is actually pretty deep information. And so I'm going to stop here. I really want you guys to take some time to kind of process this, maybe even listen to it again. I know oftentimes I talk fast. So maybe even listen to this again and do the journaling that I suggested. I really think that that's something that could be super helpful. And I will share the key points with the trauma responses and the examples of each in the show notes, just so you have them for your records. I love you all so much. I feel super blessed to be on this path with you, whether we're connected in person, connected through private practice, connected through my work at Agape Treatment Center, friend, family. It doesn't matter how we're connected. Just know that I am so super grateful to be connected with you, even if we've never met. Energetically grateful to be connected with you. And as always, thank you for trusting me to hold space for you and to guide you to a space deeper within yourself. After all, that's where your answers are. They are inside you. Nothing that you need can be found in any person, place, or thing that's outside of you. I'm saying this after many years of trying to find the answers outside of me. And I have to tell you, it was not only an aha moment, but absolutely life-changing and liberating when I began to look in and then go in a little more, deeper within. Because the deeper you go within, the more you will learn about yourself. And eventually it takes you to this place of deep knowing, of deep understanding and peace and acceptance. And it just feels really good to spend time in ourselves, because if we can admit that we are the problem, then that must mean that we can be the solution, or certainly at least part of the solution. So there's power within us, guys. There's power within us. So don't forget the power that is you. And when in doubt, breathe your way back to now. I love you guys. Until next time. Thank you for joining me today. If you found today's episode to be insightful and inspiring, subscribe so you don't miss out on the next one. And I kindly ask that you please leave me a review so together we can help the next person. To learn more about my products and services, check out www.themindfulliving.com and come connect with me on Instagram at mindfulliving.now, where I share daily inspiration, mindful skills, tips, and more. Until the next episode, stay mindful and always remember the power that lives inside of you.